Joining us live in studio, Sea Island Stephen, we're going to call him now, political analyst Stephen Lawson. We missed you last week. You're on vacation at beautiful Sea Island.
You've been waiting a week to use that Sea Island Stephen line.
Actually, I just thought of it.
Wow,
that's how my mind works. But we missed you last week, but you look tanned and refreshed and got that good Atlantic Ocean air in your lungs.
That's right. Any time down at the coast is time well spent.
And you need to recharge because this is an election year. So we're going to be weighing heavily on your expertise.
That's right.
On your official election station, 95.5 WSB. Let's start with, we had Greg Bluestein on from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. Yep. Not endorsing Rick Jackson for the governor's race. It didn't even occur to me that endorsement didn't come, and it sounds like it might not come. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think that is probably where most people felt, Mark, right? That it wasn't really something on their radar. As you mentioned, the AJC's Greg Bluestein and Patricia Murphy got that exclusive interview with the lieutenant governor fresh off of his loss to Rick Jackson in that runoff campaign. It was a very revealing interview, very interesting. I think there's clearly still some bitterness and sour grapes on the part of the lieutenant governor. Talked a lot about just the length and how visceral and nasty that campaign got, in that interview. But at the same time, I think stepping back and looking at this, Mark, that's one person and one voice. And I think what Rick Jackson is doing is looking forward and focused on November and building a coalition that can win and can beat Keisha Lance Bottoms. I think most people that I talk to, including Republicans and independents and even some Democrats, I think are really coming around to Rick Jackson supporting his campaign. I think he's got a lot of momentum. And I think what you're going to see is there may be some folks like the lieutenant governor, who are kind of still off the reservation, but the vast majority of people, certainly Republicans, are going to be with Rick Jackson.
And we talked about this during a very nasty, bloody primary. I mean, it was rough on both sides. I was questioning, are we going to see the traditional reconciliation where the party comes together no matter who the nominee is? That's generally what we see. But you mentioned Lieutenant Governor is just one individual. And I think maybe, I might be wrong on this, there's still an active lawsuit between Jackson and Jones. That might be slowing down a possible endorsement?
Yeah, there is. It's actually a lawsuit and that came up in the interview. I think Greg Bluestein brought that up. It's actually a lawsuit on behalf of Burt Jones's father against the Jackson campaign. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic, where that lands up. That's certainly something to keep an eye on. That lawsuit was coincidentally filed before the runoff was over, which is an interesting note on the timing. But look, I think all of this is kind of a distraction. I think it's going to get put in the rearview mirror. You see Rick Jackson; he's out and about, traveling the state, meeting with black business owners in the last couple of weeks. So he's
not sitting on the couch.
He's clearly trying to expand his coalition, broaden the tent, and I think that's going to serve him well in November.
So as you remember, and listeners might remember, with 2 days left in the runoff, Governor Kemp endorsed Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones. Is there any chance that the Jackson campaign might not be happy with the governor after that? I mean, they did win at the end of the day. It didn't make a difference, but can we expect Governor Kemp to be out campaigning for Rick Jackson?
I hope so. He should. Obviously Brian Kemp has a lot on the line in terms of his legacy in seeing a Republican succeed him, right? There's been a ton of massive gains. Governor Kemp has done a tremendous job over the last 8 years in terms of job creation, tax cuts, funding education, transportation, all of those things. All of that I think is on the line for him. You mentioned he really went 0 for 2 on endorsements between Derek Dooley in the U.S. Senate race and then that late endorsement of Burt Jones. Mm-hmm. I think the timing on that, we talked about that, Mark, right after early voting had really already happened, was very peculiar. I'm not sure that was a great move in hindsight. But look, I think Rick Jackson has been a huge supporter of Brian Kemp all along. I know Brian Kemp really admires Rick Jackson. So I think you're going to see that everybody's going to be on the same team, even with this Burt Jones stuff. I think that's a small distraction. I think at the end of the day, just as the Democrats did with John Ossoff and Keisha Lance Bottoms and all of those Democrats that ran against Keisha Lance Bottoms, they all got on the same page. It may have taken them a couple weeks, but I think you're going to see the same thing.
And I agree with you. You know, the Burt Jones non-endorsement might not be a big deal at one individual, but as you well know, Burt Jones's fans are rabid. Like, his supporters were all in on Burt Jones, and might they follow his lead and be like, you know what? If he's not for Jackson, I'm not for Jackson. I'm just going to sit this one out. Am I just throwing something against the wall and seeing if it sticks?
Well, I mean, look, there is conventional wisdom might lead you to believe that, but what I would remind people is think about 2022 when you had Donald Trump-backed candidates running against Republican incumbents across the board, and think about David Perdue, all that visceral animosity that the fringe part of the party had against Brian Kemp, but he won convincingly and then beat Stacey Abrams by 7.5%. So I think that everybody comes home at the end of the day. Everybody puts their jerseys on at the end of the day in November. The question again is who can go get those 200,000 or 300,000 swing independent voters in the November election. That's what both sides are going to be focused on.
I'm glad you mentioned that endorsement going back to 2022, because this just popped before you came in on Truth Social. President Trump, full-throated endorsement for Mike Lindell running for the governor seat in Minnesota, the My Pillow guy. To me, that's a fringe endorsement. Candidates matter. Is there any chance the pillow guy gets the nomination there?
I don't think so. I think he should probably go back to focusing on pillows in that race. I think that's it
was weird to see
very
that.
very odd.
I know he's loyal to the president maybe to a fault, but I mean, as strong as the president's endorsement can be, ask Thomas Massey, ask a number of people, I don't know if that's going to get Mike Lindell over the finish line.
Yeah, it cuts both ways. I mean, and obviously in a state like Minnesota, right, that's center left, on a good day for Republicans, that's not going to help to have that endorsement. So, it cuts both ways. Obviously, in a Republican primary, it can be very powerful. We know that track record exists. We've seen that on full display over the last few months. But again, in states like Minnesota and states like Georgia, right, where we are a battleground state, it's the jury is still out sometimes on those endorsements in general elections.
Candidates always matter.
Candidates matter.
Political analyst Stephen Lawson live in studio. Back to Georgia. Got a couple of early polls in the governor's race and the Senate race. I'm not putting too much stock in them. It's just an early indication. But from what I've seen, it seems like Senator Ossoff has got a lead over Congressman Collins, and in the governor's race, it seems pretty even, or maybe Rick Jackson leading Keisha Lance Bottoms by a little bit. Am I reading those numbers correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. You basically had two public polls. You had a Fox News poll that was really a massive outlier from a lot of people's perspective, and then you had a WIC poll that kind of was a little bit closer. It had John Ossoff up, I believe, by about 4 or 5 points, and then had
close
Rick
to
Jackson.
The margin of error.
Had Rick Jackson up by 1. I think that's about where it is. I do think Rick Jackson is probably running 4 or 5 points ahead of Mike Collins right now. We've talked about on the show. I think John Ossoff is in a very strong position heading into November. But we know that's going to change. We know both of these races are going to be very tight. I do think that Rick Jackson is probably, in terms of that contrast between himself and Keisha Lance Bottoms that we've talked about, Mark, I think in a stronger position. I do think John Ossoff, given his fundraising advantage, given the money, given his tenure as an incumbent, the power of the incumbency, is in a stronger position. But look, this recent Supreme Court ruling that allows political parties, national political parties, to coordinate with campaigns is a massive boost for Mike Collins because the RNC and national Republicans groups have 10x times the amount of money that national Democrats have. That could be an advantage for Mike Collins. I think that race will get close, but John Ossoff has the upper hand right now.
And didn't have to spend money in a primary, ran unopposed, a lot of cash on hand. We just got latest fundraising numbers for Congressman Collins. Sizable number, but still dwarfed by the Ossoff figure.
Yeah, I think the recent reports show that he raised about $2.1 million for the quarter. You got to keep in mind, too, though, with that number, that really is essentially only 2 or 3 weeks after the runoff primary that he came out of. So he was able, I think, given that, that's a pretty impressive number. But again, dwarfed by John Ossoff's $20 million raised in the quarter. And we've talked about on the show, he is getting tons and tons of money from outside groups, particularly Democrat states in California, New York, and Illinois. But that is, at the end of the day, money's money, and he's putting it to good use, and I think it'll be a big boost for him.
Speaking of the Senate, we lost, shockingly, lost Lindsey Graham over the weekend. Flags at half staff ordered by Governor Kemp. He was a very powerful figure in Georgia politics, most notably mending the fence between President Trump and Governor Kemp back in the day.
Yeah, he certainly a storied track record. Lindsey Graham, a statesman from South Carolina, long tenured senator. He was a congressman before that. And certainly had done a lot on the world stage, right? When we think about Ukraine, we think about Israel, had a very strong influence in global politics. And certainly here at home in Georgia, he was instrumental in brokering that détente, that peace deal between President Trump and Brian Kemp. He was active in Georgia politics here in terms of some of these Senate races. And so he will be sorely missed, and I think it's just been cool to see everybody focus on his legacy and what he meant to the state.
It's a hell of a word, by the way, the détente. I love that.
Yeah.
That just might have garnished you star of the show. That's a highfalutin, educated word right there, my friends. Just finally, so the South Carolina governor appointed Lindsey's sister to finish out his term. There's going to be he's up for election. Obviously, he was up for election. Ceremonial. Is there any reason to be like, why his sister, or is this expected? Is it out of the ordinary? I don't know what to make of his sister taking over the seat.
Yeah, look, I think it's a fitting nod and a fitting tribute to.
So it's
to
a tribute appointment.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
I think so in the short term. I think the question is, does she want to run for the seat long term? I think that's an evolving question and an outstanding question. Obviously, Senate seats in South Carolina don't come up that often, and when they do, they're pretty safe. So I think you're going to see a lot of people trying to jockey potentially for that
a ton of folks,
seat long term. But it'll be interesting to see if she ends up being more than a placeholder. A lot of times placeholders get in those seats and they do really well, and they love it, and they're welcomed by their constituents and other colleagues, and it ends up being a long-term thing. Yeah. So that's something to keep an eye on.
All right, before we go, can you just FaceTime Mitch McConnell real quick? I just do a proof of life.
I talked to him for 20 minutes the other day, so it was a great conversation.
There he is. Sea Island, Stephen Lawson in studio. Good to see you, my friend.
Always a pleasure.
Dentons.com, by the way. Dentons.com.